They gave me Apache twin sisters as slaves, but I let them be free. It was a quiet morning on the edge of the frontier. The sun had just risen, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. Birds chirped in the distance, and a gentle wind moved through the tall grass surrounding the ranch. The young rancher Thomas was tending to his horses when a visitor arrived at the gate. He was a man from a nearby trading post, someone Thomas had known for years. But the news he brought was strange and disturbing. Thomas was told that as part of a recent trade he had been given 2 young Apache twin sisters. At first, Thomas could not believe his ears. He had never asked for such a thing, and the idea of owning human beings made him deeply uncomfortable. In that time, some people still treated others as property, and slavery existed in certain areas. But Thomas had always believed that every human being deserved respect and freedom. His heart sank as he imagined the girls, strangers from a distant land, taken from their family, now forced into a situation they had no control over. When the girls arrived, they were frightened and silent. Their eyes were wide, full of confusion and fear, and they clung to each other for comfort. They had no idea who this man was, or what their life would be like from this moment forward. Thomas noticed how small and fragile they looked, how their hands shook as they held tightly to one another. He felt a lump in his throat. The idea of keeping them as slaves felt wrong in every way. Despite the expectations of the society around him, Thomas could not imagine treating them as property. He decided from the very beginning that he would not hurt them, and he would not force them into servitude. Instead, he offered them food, water, and a place to rest. The girls were cautious at first, unsure if this man would treat them kindly, or like the others who had taken them from their home. Thomas spoke softly, using gestures and simple words, trying to communicate that he meant no harm. In the days that followed, Thomas watched the girls closely. He noticed the small ways they adjusted to their new surroundings. One sister would peek out from behind a curtain, curious about the animals in the barn. The other would quietly observe Thomas as he worked, never speaking, but always listening. They were intelligent and careful, and Thomas realized that they had already learned to protect themselves in a world that had been unkind to them. Thomas also began to learn about the girls' culture, as much as he could without speaking their language fluently. He noticed the way they moved, their gestures, their small routines. They had a quiet dignity even in their fear. Thomas felt a growing sense of responsibility, not as an owner, but as someone who could help them feel safe until they could return to a life of freedom. He began to teach them small things that could help them survive in this new environment: how to feed the animals, how to carry water safely, and how to keep warm in the cold nights. But everything he taught was done with patience and respect. He never commanded or forced them, only guided them. At the same time, Thomas faced pressure from the outside world. Neighbors and travelers would sometimes pass by and notice the girls. Some asked questions, often framed in a way that suggested he should make use of what he had been given. Others whispered behind his back, unsure why he treated the girls with such care instead of following the norms of the time. Thomas ignored the gossip. He knew in his heart that kindness was not weakness, and that he could not betray his own sense of right and wrong for the sake of social approval. Despite the challenges, small moments of connection began to grow. One morning, as Thomas prepared breakfast, one of the twins slowly stepped forward and took a piece of bread from his hand. She looked at him with cautious eyes, and for the first time, there was a hint of trust. Later, the other sister copied her, reaching for a warm bowl of porridge. Thomas smiled quietly, understanding that these small gestures were their way of beginning to feel safe. Trust would take time, he knew, but every day he tried to make their lives a little more comfortable. The girls also showed signs of intelligence and curiosity. They began to explore the ranch quietly, always together, sometimes watching Thomas as he worked in the fields. Thomas realized that they were not just scared children. They were observant, careful, and resilient. He admired their courage. Even though it was quiet and understated, he began to speak with them more often, learning a few words of their language from gestures and repetition. Communication was slow, but every word they shared brought them closer. In the evenings, Thomas would sit by the fire and try to teach the girls small lessons about the world around them. He would point to the stars and explain how people use them to find their way, or show them how to read the tracks of animals in the dust. He wanted them to feel that knowledge was power and that they could learn to survive and thrive even in a place that felt strange and unfamiliar. The twins listened carefully, sometimes asking questions with hand gestures or simple sounds. But Thomas answered as best as he could, patient and encouraging. As the days turned into weeks, the fear in the girls' eyes began to soften, replaced by cautious curiosity and a sense of growing safety. Thomas noticed that they laughed softly at small things, like the antics of a horse or the way a puppy tumbled over itself. It was a small victory, but to Thomas, it meant everything. He realized that his decision not to treat them as property was changing their lives already. They were beginning to see him not as a captor, but as someone who cared for them. At night, Thomas often lay awake thinking about what the future might hold. He knew that keeping the twins with him indefinitely could be dangerous, not because he wanted to hurt them, but because others might try to claim them. He also knew that their hearts belonged to their people, and that his ultimate goal must be to return them to their homeland and family if possible. But for now, his task was to protect them, teach them, and allow them to feel safe in a world that had been cruel to them. By the end of that first month, the twins were no longer trembling at every sound. They moved through the ranch with a quiet confidence, always together, always cautious, but slowly learning that this man did not intend to harm them. Thomas felt a mixture of relief and responsibility. He understood that he had been given an unexpected gift, not of ownership, but of the chance to do what was right. He was beginning a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about courage, justice, and humanity. And so life on the ranch settled into a careful rhythm. Thomas worked, the girls learned, and trust grew slowly, day by day. The world outside might not approve, but inside the small circle of the ranch, kindness and respect began to take root. It was a fragile peace, but it was real, and it was a beginning. And Thomas knew that this was only the first step in a much larger journey, one that would test his courage, his morals, and his heart in ways he could not yet imagine. The days on the ranch passed slowly, but each day brought new discoveries and quiet lessons. Thomas had grown more attentive to the twins' needs, noticing their little habits and preferences. One of the girls preferred to help with the animals, her small hands gentle as she brushed the horses and fed the chickens. The other liked to explore the garden, fascinated by the colors of the flowers and the smell of fresh herbs. Thomas watched them with a mixture of admiration and concern. He realized that even in the midst of fear and loss, the girls still had the spark of curiosity and wonder that all children carry within them. He continued to teach them practical skills for living on the ranch, but always with respect. He showed them how to collect eggs without breaking them, how to milk a cow carefully, and how to carry water without spilling. He did not shout or command. Instead, he demonstrated, then guided them gently when they struggled. Thomas noticed that the girls were quick learners. They observed every movement, every gesture, and soon they could complete tasks with confidence. Their quiet determination impressed him more than any strength or skill he had seen before. The twins began to show their personalities in small ways. The older of the two, though very close in age, seemed slightly more outgoing. She would approach Thomas when he worked and ask questions, using gestures and sounds to make herself understood. The younger sister was more cautious, staying behind her twin, watching and listening. Sometimes she would smile quietly when she thought Thomas was not looking. These small moments made Thomas's heart feel lighter, though he never forgot the weight of the girl's situation. Thomas wanted to learn more about their lives before they had been brought to him. He understood that their experiences were different from anything he had known, and he wanted to honor their story. He tried to teach them words in English, while also learning a few words from their language. At first, communication was slow and frustrating. Simple ideas had to be repeated many times before they were understood, but over time they developed a small shared language of gestures, sounds, and words that allowed them to talk about their day, the animals, and the little joys of life on the ranch. One afternoon, Thomas decided to take the girls on a walk beyond the ranch. He wanted them to see the world outside their immediate surroundings and to teach them about the land in a safe and controlled way. The girls held his hands tightly as they walked through the fields, their eyes wide with curiosity. They noticed the tall trees, the flowing stream, and the birds flying overhead. Thomas explained how to identify the tracks of deer, how to tell the difference between edible and inedible plants, and how to be cautious of dangers in the wild. The girls listened carefully, absorbing every detail. During these walks, Thomas began to notice how deeply the girls had been affected by their past. Sometimes a sound would startle them, or a sudden movement would make them cling to him in fear. He never scolded them for these reactions. Instead, he would speak softly, reassuring them that they were safe. Slowly, day by day, their fear lessened. They began to explore a little further from his side, learning to trust their surroundings and the protection Thomas offered. The community around the ranch began to notice the unusual arrangement. Neighbors who came to trade or visit would whisper among themselves when they saw Thomas walking with the girls. Some were curious and asked questions. Thomas answered as best he could, explaining that he was simply keeping them safe until they could be returned to their home. Others were suspicious, believing that he was acting against the social norms of the time. Thomas paid them little attention, focusing instead on building trust with the twins. One evening, after the chores were done, Thomas sat by the fire with the girls. He offered them warm porridge, and they accepted quietly, their small hands trembling slightly. He told them stories of the stars, of animals, and of the land around them. Sometimes he would draw pictures in the dirt, showing a deer, a horse, or a tree, while explaining how each moved and lived. The girls were captivated, their eyes shining with wonder. These were moments of learning, but also moments of connection, where fear began to give way to understanding and trust. Thomas also noticed that the twins had moments of sadness. They would sit quietly, staring into the distance, and sometimes he could see tears in their eyes. He understood that they were thinking of their family, their home, and the life they had lost. He never forced them to speak about these memories, but he allowed them to grieve in their own way. Sometimes he would simply sit beside them, holding their hands silently, offering comfort without words. This quiet support helped them feel less alone in a world that had been unkind. Over time, the twins began to play more freely. They chased each other around the barn, laughing softly, or played games with Thomas, learning how to throw a ball or catch small animals safely. These moments of joy were small, but they were victories. Thomas realized that giving them freedom to explore, to learn, and to express themselves was more important than teaching them tasks or routines. Their laughter, though quiet, became a symbol of hope and resilience. Thomas also thought about the future constantly. He knew that keeping the girls on the ranch forever was not the right choice. Their hearts belonged to their people, and he felt a deep responsibility to ensure they could one day return to them. At the same time, he knew that the journey would be dangerous. Many people in the surrounding areas would not understand his intentions and might try to prevent their safe return. He began to plan carefully, considering how he could protect the girls while preparing them for the life that awaited beyond the ranch. One afternoon, the twins surprised Thomas. They had learned a few new words and tried to speak them to him. The older sister pointed to a horse and said the word he had taught her, while the younger sister mimicked his gestures. Thomas laughed softly, his heart full. These small achievements reminded him that, despite all they had endured, the girls were strong, intelligent, and capable of learning and growing. Every new word, every small gesture of understanding was a victory for all of them. Life on the ranch began to settle into a rhythm. Thomas, the girls, and the animals moved together in a careful balance of work, learning, and trust. Each day brought small victories, small discoveries, and small moments of joy. Yet beneath it all, Thomas knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger journey. The challenges ahead would test their courage, their patience, and their bond. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. By the end of this part of their story, the girls were no longer silent and fearful. They had begun to trust Thomas and the safety of the ranch. They had learned new skills, new words, and new ways to express themselves. Thomas had learned patience, empathy, and the power of quiet courage. Together they had begun a journey not just of survival, but of connection, understanding, and hope. And though the world outside the ranch might not approve, within its boundaries, trust and respect had taken root. It was a fragile peace, but it was a real one, and it was growing day by day. Thomas knew that he could not change the past, but he could protect the present and help shape the future. For the twins, this was the beginning of a life where kindness and freedom were possible, and Thomas had promised himself that he would do everything in his power to keep that promise. As the weeks passed, life on the ranch grew more settled, but the quiet peace that Thomas and the twins had built did not go unnoticed. Word began to spread through the nearby settlements that Thomas was living with the Apache twin sisters. Some people were curious, some were skeptical, and some were openly hostile. Thomas could feel the eyes of the community on him whenever he went into town to buy supplies or trade with neighboring ranchers. Whispers followed him wherever he went, and he could hear fragments of conversations. Why is he keeping those girls? Or, he should send them back where they belong. Thomas ignored the gossip, but he knew that not everyone shared his values. There were people who saw the twins only as property or profit. Traders who had once been friendly now looked at him with suspicion. A few strangers came to the ranch, pretending to be travelers or merchants, but Thomas could sense that their interest was not innocent. They asked too many questions about the girls, the ranch, and his daily routines. Thomas always answered politely but never gave away too much information. He had learned to be cautious, for the safety of the twins depended on him remaining vigilant. The twins, for their part, had grown more confident in their daily lives, but they could sense the tension in the air. Sometimes, when strangers approached the ranch, they would cling to Thomas's legs, their small hands gripping him tightly. Their eyes would dart around nervously, and Thomas would reassure them softly, speaking words of comfort that they could understand. He knew that their fear was not irrational. The world outside the ranch was unpredictable, and the twins had already experienced great loss. One day, a traveling merchant stopped by the ranch, claiming to sell supplies. As he spoke with Thomas, he asked pointed questions about the twins, about where they had come from, and whether Thomas intended to keep them permanently. Thomas felt his chest tighten. He knew that this man could be dangerous if he discovered that Thomas planned to protect the girls and one day return them to their people. With calm firmness, Thomas replied that the girls were under his care and that he had no intention of harming them. The merchant left, but Thomas could not shake the unease that settled in his stomach. As the threat of outsiders grew, Thomas realized that he needed to prepare the twins for potential dangers. He began teaching them more than just chores and routines. He taught them how to be alert, how to notice when someone was approaching, and how to stay safe without panicking. He showed them how to hide in the barn or behind trees if needed, and how to speak only when necessary. The twins learned quickly, their natural intelligence and attentiveness making them adept at understanding the risks around them. Despite these precautions, Thomas also wanted to nurture the girls' sense of wonder and joy. He knew that fear alone could not shape their lives. They needed moments of happiness to grow strong and resilient. He organized small adventures around the ranch, allowing the twins to explore the nearby creek, watch the birds build nests, and follow the tracks of small animals in the soft dirt. The girls laughed quietly, sometimes squealing with delight as they chased one another or discovered a hidden bird's nest. These moments reminded Thomas why it was so important to protect them, not just for their safety, but for their freedom to experience life. However, the tension in the community continued to rise. Some neighbors openly criticized Thomas, claiming that he was acting against the rules of society. They said that the twins should be sent back, that he had no right to keep them, and that he would bring trouble upon himself if he refused. Thomas stood his ground, explaining that he was protecting the girls until they could return safely to their people. He did not argue angrily. He spoke with quiet conviction, letting his actions and care speak louder than words. One evening, Thomas noticed signs that someone had been near the ranch during the night. Footprints in the soft dirt, broken branches near the fence, and a sense of being watched made his heart race. He knew that the twins were vulnerable and that he had to be even more careful. He reinforced the fences, secured the doors, and made sure that the girls understood where to go if they needed to hide. Though they were frightened, the twins trusted Thomas completely, following his instructions without hesitation. This trust, built over weeks of gentle care, became a shield against the growing threats from the outside world. The twins also began to express themselves more openly as they felt safer. They taught Thomas small songs from their culture, shared simple drawings in the dirt, and showed him how to make patterns with sticks and stones. These moments of creativity and cultural sharing deepened the bond between them. Thomas realized that protecting them meant not only keeping them physically safe, but also respecting their identity, their traditions, and their right to be who they were. Every smile, every gesture of connection reinforced his resolve to help them live freely. One day, a group of traders arrived at the ranch unexpectedly. They claimed to be friendly, but Thomas could sense the tension in the air. They asked many questions about the girls, their origin, and their purpose on the ranch. Thomas remained calm, answering only what was necessary while keeping a watchful eye on the strangers. The twins huddled close to him, sensing the danger even if they did not understand every word. Thomas reassured them with gentle touches and whispered words, reminding them that they were safe under his care. The encounter left Thomas more determined than ever to find a permanent solution for the twins. He knew that keeping them on the ranch indefinitely would not be enough. The world outside was unpredictable, and there were people who would not understand his intentions. He began to think about the long-term plan. One day he would find a way to return the twins to their community safely. This thought filled him with both hope and anxiety. The journey would be difficult, but he could not ignore the responsibility he felt toward the girls. Meanwhile, the twins continued to grow stronger and more independent. They learned to navigate the ranch safely, to help with chores efficiently, and to communicate their needs more clearly. Their confidence increased, and Thomas noticed small signs of bravery, how they would venture slightly further from his side, how they would speak up when something frightened them, and how they began to assert small choices in their daily routines. These changes filled him with quiet pride, knowing that his patience and kindness were helping them heal and grow. Despite the growing external threats, the bond between Thomas and the twins deepened. They were no longer just children under his care. They were companions, students, and friends. They trusted him implicitly, and he had learned to read their moods, fears, and joys with careful attention. Every day brought new challenges, but also new victories. Small acts of courage, moments of understanding, and glimpses of the freedom that one day he hoped they would fully experience. Thomas also reflected on his own journey during this time. He had entered this situation unsure of what to do, feeling conflicted about his role and responsibilities. Now he understood that true courage was not about strength or power, but about standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult or unpopular. Protecting the twins required patience, wisdom, and careful planning. It required him to act against social expectations and to trust his own moral compass. By the end of this part of the story, the twins were stronger, more confident, and beginning to understand the protection and care Thomas offered. They had moments of joy, creativity, and learning, but they were also aware of the dangers that surrounded them. Thomas, in turn, had grown more vigilant, more determined, and more committed to the promise he had made to protect them and one day return them to freedom. Life on the ranch had become a delicate balance between safety, learning, and preparation. The world outside might not understand, but within the small boundaries of the ranch, trust, respect, and courage were growing. Thomas knew that the challenges ahead would be even greater, but he was ready to face them. The twins had become a part of his life in a way that went beyond responsibility. They had become a reminder of the importance of kindness, justice, and moral courage in a world that often overlooked these values. And so, as the sun set over the rolling fields and the gentle wind whispered through the grass, Thomas and the twins settled into the evening with a quiet understanding. They were safe for now, but the journey toward true freedom was only beginning. Together they would face the trials ahead, strengthened by trust, love, and the unwavering belief that every human being deserved to be free. Thomas had long known that the twins could not stay on the ranch forever. Though they were safer than they had been anywhere else, the outside world remained unpredictable, and the threats from those who did not understand his intentions were real. Every day he thought about the future and how he could return the twins to their people safely. The thought weighed on him heavily, but he also knew that their freedom was worth every risk. One early morning, Thomas began preparing for the journey. He packed supplies carefully: dried meat, water, blankets, and tools. He also packed small comforts for the girls, things that might remind them of home or bring them some joy during the trip. The twins watched curiously as he worked, asking questions with gestures and sounds. Thomas smiled gently, answering each question as best he could. He wanted them to understand that this journey, though uncertain, was a step toward returning to the life they had lost. The day of departure arrived, and Thomas led the twins out of the safety of the ranch for the first time. They walked slowly at first, holding his hands tightly. Their eyes were wide as they looked at the unfamiliar land stretching before them. Hills rose in the distance, rivers curved through the valley, and the wind carried strange scents. The twins were cautious, but they trusted Thomas completely. Every step forward was both a physical and emotional challenge, and Thomas felt a deep responsibility to keep them safe. The journey was not easy. The terrain was rough, with narrow paths, thick forests, and rocky hills. Thomas guided the girls carefully, pointing out safe routes and warning them of dangers. They had to cross streams, climb gentle slopes, and avoid areas where wild animals might roam. At each step, Thomas encouraged the twins, praising them for their bravery and careful attention. He could see their confidence growing, though he also noticed moments of hesitation and fear. Along the way, Thomas told the twins stories of the land, of the animals they saw, and of the people who lived nearby. He pointed out tracks in the dirt, teaching them to recognize the difference between a deer, a rabbit, or a coyote. He showed them which plants were safe to touch or eat, and which ones could be dangerous. The twins listened carefully, their eyes bright with curiosity. These lessons were not only practical, they also gave the girls a sense of power and control over their surroundings. At night, Thomas would make a small camp, building a fire and spreading blankets on the ground. The twins would sit close to him, their small hands clasped together or holding his. He would offer warm food and sometimes tell quiet stories by the firelight. The flames flickered across their faces, and Thomas could see a mix of fear, excitement, and trust in their eyes. He often thought about how far they had come, from frightened, silent children to young girls capable of courage and hope. Despite the careful planning, dangers were never far away. One evening, as they made their way through a narrow valley, Thomas noticed signs that they were being followed. Footprints in the dirt, broken branches, and the distant sound of voices alerted him immediately. He whispered to the twins to stay close and move quietly. They obeyed without hesitation, their trust in him unwavering. Thomas guided them to a hidden area behind thick bushes where they could wait safely. The strangers passed without noticing them, and Thomas breathed a quiet sigh of relief. This incident reminded Thomas that the journey to freedom was not just a physical challenge, but also a test of courage and vigilance. He realized that he had to remain alert at all times, protecting the twins not only from the dangers of the land, but also from people who might try to harm or capture them. At the same time, he wanted to ensure that the girls' spirits remained strong. Fear alone could not guide them. Hope, trust, and small joys were equally important. During the day, Thomas encouraged the twins to explore their surroundings cautiously. They would look for safe paths, watch birds in the trees, and identify plants and stones. These small explorations gave the girls confidence and a sense of control. Thomas praised their observations and careful decisions, reinforcing their independence. He wanted them to understand that they were capable of facing challenges, even as he guided and protected them. As the days passed, the twins began to show remarkable resilience. They adapted to the routines of walking, climbing, and setting up camps. They learned to help with the small tasks of the journey, carrying light bundles, collecting firewood, and preparing simple meals under Thomas's supervision. Each day, their laughter returned in small moments. A playful chase along a riverbank, a shared story whispered in the tent, or a discovery of a beautiful flower. These moments reminded Thomas why he had undertaken this journey. They were not only surviving, but beginning to live again. The journey also strengthened the bond between Thomas and the twins. He learned to read their moods and fears, offering comfort when needed and encouragement when appropriate. The twins, in turn, relied on him completely, trusting his judgment and guidance. This trust became their greatest strength, allowing them to navigate the challenges of the wilderness with courage and determination. Along the way, Thomas reflected on the moral lessons of this journey. He understood that freedom was not merely the absence of physical captivity, but also the ability to grow, learn, and express oneself safely. By respecting the twins' feelings, traditions, and autonomy, he was helping them reclaim a part of their identity that had been taken from them. Every decision he made, from the routes they took to the words he used to reassure them, was guided by this understanding. One afternoon, as they rested near a quiet stream, Thomas noticed a small group of deer drinking water nearby. The twins watched silently, captivated by the sight. Thomas explained the behavior of the deer, how they moved, and how they stayed alert to danger. The girls asked questions through gestures and small sounds, and Thomas answered patiently. These moments of learning and wonder reminded him that the journey was about more than just reaching a destination. It was about helping the twins grow in confidence, knowledge, and joy. As they neared the lands of the twins' people, Thomas felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. He knew that the final leg of the journey would be the most difficult. The terrain was unfamiliar, and he did not know what kind of reception they would receive. He also worried about the possibility of encountering people who might misunderstand his intentions or pose a threat. Despite these fears, he remained determined. The twins' freedom and the fulfillment of his promise were more important than any danger. Finally, after many days of careful travel, they reached the outskirts of the Apache lands. The girls recognized the trees, the river, and the hills. Their faces lit up with excitement, and they ran ahead, though Thomas reminded them to stay cautious. They were returning to a place that belonged to them, a place of family, culture, and home. Thomas felt a deep sense of relief and pride. The journey had been long and challenging, but they had reached a point where freedom was within their grasp. At the boundary of their homeland, Thomas paused. He looked at the twins, now standing confidently but with eyes full of emotion. He knelt down and spoke softly, using words and gestures they could understand. He explained that they were safe now, and that he had done everything he could to bring them home. The girls hugged him tightly, their small hands holding his as they expressed their gratitude in ways that words could not capture. Thomas felt a mixture of joy and sorrow. Joy for their freedom, sorrow at the thought of leaving them behind. As the twins ran toward their people, Thomas watched silently. He knew that this was the end of his journey with them, but also the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. They had been brave, resilient, and trusting throughout the journey, and now they would return to a life that belonged to them. Thomas turned to leave, carrying the memories of the journey, the lessons he had learned, and the quiet satisfaction of having done what was right. The moment the twins stepped into the familiar land of their people, a wave of emotion swept over them. The trees, the river, and the hills, all the sights and sounds of home, filled them with a sense of relief and joy they had not felt since before they were taken. Their small faces lit up with recognition, and their eyes sparkled with hope. For Thomas, the sight was both beautiful and bittersweet. He had guided them on this long, difficult journey, and now it was ending. The girls were free, but his role in their lives was coming to a close. As the twins ran toward their people, they were met by family members and members of their community. Tears flowed freely as relatives embraced them, holding them close and whispering words of comfort and welcome. Thomas watched quietly from a distance, letting the girls reconnect with those they had missed so dearly. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that his promise to protect them and help them return home had been honored. Every risk he had taken, every day of vigilance, had led to this moment. The community surrounded the twins, asking questions about their journey, their experiences, and the man who had brought them back safely. Thomas approached slowly, and the elders welcomed him with cautious respect. They listened as he explained, with careful words, how he had cared for the girls, taught them skills, and protected them from harm. They were impressed by his honesty, his patience, and his commitment to doing what was right, even when it was not easy. For Thomas, this recognition was quiet but meaningful. He had acted not for reward or praise, but out of moral conviction, and seeing the twins reunited with their people was reward enough. The twins, now free to be themselves completely, ran through the fields and played by the river. They laughed openly, their voices bright and joyful. Thomas observed them, feeling a mixture of pride and nostalgia. He remembered how frightened and silent they had been when he first met them, and he marveled at how far they had come. Their resilience, courage, and trust had made the journey possible, and their joy now was a testament to their strength and to the careful guidance he had offered. As the day passed, Thomas spent time talking with the community, learning about the culture, traditions, and daily life of the twins. He realized that he had only glimpsed a small part of their world before. The elders shared stories, rituals, and knowledge, and Thomas listened with respect and curiosity. He learned that the girls had a rich heritage, full of wisdom, stories, and skills that had been passed down through generations. This knowledge reminded him why it had been so important to return them, not simply to freedom, but to a life that honored who they truly were. Though the twins were now safe and happy, Thomas could not ignore the emotional weight of leaving them. He had grown attached to their presence, their small gestures, their laughter, and even their quiet moments of fear. Yet he understood that love and care sometimes meant letting go. True care meant giving the girls the life they deserved, not the one he could provide. He watched them closely, noting their expressions, their interactions, and their joy, and he felt a sense of peace. He had done what he set out to do. The twins came to him one last time, holding his hands and looking into his eyes with trust and gratitude. Though they could not fully express their words in his language, their actions spoke volumes. They hugged him, whispered gestures of thanks, and touched his cheek gently. Thomas knelt down to their level and smiled softly, feeling a mix of sorrow and joy. He reassured them through gestures and simple words that they were safe, loved, and free. This final moment of connection was deeply emotional, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they had shared through hardship, learning, and trust. Thomas then prepared to leave, knowing that his journey with the twins had ended. The community offered him food, rest, and gratitude, but he politely declined most of the attention. His reward was the knowledge that the twins were free, safe, and returning to a life filled with family and tradition. As he walked away from the village, he looked back one last time. The twins waved, smiling brightly, and he waved back, holding on to the memory of their journey together. Every challenge, every danger, and every moment of fear had led to this perfect conclusion. On his way back to his own home, Thomas reflected on the lessons he had learned. He realized that true courage was not measured by strength or fearlessness, but by doing what is right, even when it is difficult. Protecting the twins had required vigilance, patience, wisdom, and moral conviction. He had learned that kindness and respect can overcome fear and distrust, and that trust, once earned, can create bonds stronger than any obstacle. Most importantly, he had seen the power of freedom, the ability to grow, learn, and express oneself without fear. Thomas also thought about the world he lived in, where injustice and cruelty were too often accepted. He understood that not everyone would have made the choices he did, and that his actions might be misunderstood or criticized, yet he felt no regret. By following his conscience, he had made a real difference in the lives of two young girls. The journey had been difficult, but it had shown him the importance of moral courage and empathy. It had reminded him that even small actions, guided by goodness, can change the course of lives. Over the next few days, Thomas continued his work at the ranch, but he carried the experience with him everywhere he went. He noticed things differently now: the quiet strength of the animals, the way children played safely, and the trust that grew slowly between people. The memory of the twins reminded him that life is fragile, but also that it is capable of growth and joy when guided by care, respect, and love. He felt more connected to the world and more aware of his responsibilities as a human being. As weeks turned into months, Thomas often thought about the twins and the life they were building with their community. Imagine them running freely through the fields, learning from their elders, and growing strong in mind, body, and spirit. The thought brought a smile to his face. He had played only a part in their story, yet that part had been meaningful. He understood that sometimes the greatest acts of courage are not the ones that bring fame or recognition, but the quiet, patient efforts that allow others to reclaim their freedom and dignity. In time, Thomas's story spread quietly among the surrounding settlements. People spoke of the man who had returned two young girls to their people, who had risked his own safety to ensure their freedom. Some praised his courage and morality. Others simply shook their heads, unsure of his intentions. But Thomas did not seek approval or reward. His satisfaction came from knowing that he had done what was right, and that the twins were living a life they truly deserved. Looking back, Thomas realized that the journey with the twins had changed him in profound ways. He had learned the value of patience, the importance of empathy, and the strength that comes from moral conviction. He had discovered that protecting others often requires courage, wisdom, and vigilance, but that the rewards, trust, joy, and freedom, were priceless. Most importantly, he had seen how acts of kindness and courage can ripple outward, affecting not just one life, but many. As the sun set over the hills and the wind whispered through the grass, Thomas stood quietly, reflecting on the journey he had shared with the twins. Their freedom was a light in a world that often seemed dark, a reminder that even in difficult times, goodness, courage, and empathy could prevail. He smiled softly, feeling a sense of completion, knowing that he had honored the promise he had made to protect, to guide, and ultimately to set free. And in the quiet of the evening, Thomas understood the most important lesson of all. Sometimes, the greatest courage is not in fighting or winning, but in making the choice to do what is right, even when it is hard, even when the world does not understand. The twins were free, their spirits restored, and the journey had shown him the true power of kindness, patience, and moral courage. That knowledge stayed with him forever, a guiding light in the years to come.